Hi, grade 10s. Here is Unit 5, Lesson 8. It is the last lesson of Unit 5. So after you complete this lesson, your next goal is going to be to start that Unit 5 final assignment I gave to you. If you were in a class to receive a hard copy, you can just go into OneNote and you'll see it listed there at the end of Unit 5 among all the files. You will be handing in this Unit 5 packet on your first day back to class. You don't have to email me these answers. It's so much easier for me to just mark it on paper. So you can have the weekend to work on the assignment and then hand it in to me either Monday or Tuesday, whenever you're back. Okay, so Unit 5, Lesson 8 is where you're going to determine the slope and intercepts from an equation. So in Lesson 7, I gave you graphs. And I said determine the slope. So that's where you would choose 2 points and you would hop between the points. You would do rise over run. And then the intercepts, the x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis at. And then the y-intercept is where the graph crossed the y-intercept at. And we told all of that from the graph. In these questions here, we don't actually have the graph. We have the equation. So every graph, every line, actually has an equation that belongs to it that describes it. So for this lesson today, I'm giving you that equation and we are going to take that equation and figure out the slope and the x and y intercepts from that equation. So if you remember when I explained x-intercepts and y-intercepts in the last lesson, the x-intercept is always in the form of a point. Okay, you find where it crosses the x-axis at and you write that number there in the x spot, and then y is always 0. And then similarly for the y-intercept, if I ask you where does it cross the y-axis at, you find where it crosses the y-axis at what number, you write that down in the y spot, and then x is 0. So if I am asking you to determine the x-intercept of an equation, whenever we figure out the x-intercept, we know for sure that at that point, y is 0. So what we do is we take the equation and we're going to substitute y with a 0 and then solve for x. Okay, so I'm going to show you the work here to find the x-intercept. So what you do, like I said, is you take the equation negative 2x plus 2y, but where I see a y, I replace it with 0. So it's like I'm forcing y to be 0. So I'm forcing myself to find that point. So now I solve for x. So I have negative 2x. Now 2 times 0 is 0. So it just goes away, right? And then I have 6 on the right hand side. Then I divide off by negative 2 to solve. And in the end, I have x equaling negative 3. So I just found out that the x-intercept will cross at where x equals negative 3. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing for my y-intercept, but we know that when we're looking for where the graph crosses the y-axis at, x is 0. So I'm on step 2 here, okay? So now I'm doing that guy. All right, so I take the equation, negative 2x, but I'm forcing x to be 0. And then I recopy the rest of the equation, plus 2y equals 6. Now, negative 2 times 0 is just 0, so that just goes away. So I have 2y equaling 6. I divide off the 2, and I get that y equals positive 3. So I know now that I have a point at where y equals 3. So again, to find the x-intercept, I replaced y with 0. To find the y-intercept, I replaced x with 0, and I found my intercepts. Okay. So then it says for my next step, to be able to determine the slope, I have to graph the points, which I already did, right? I graphed my 2 points. So now to determine the slope, I just do my hopping, right? I have my 2 points, so now I do my rise over run. So I rise 1, 2, 3. So rising means positive. And then I go over 1, 2, 3 to the right. That's also positive 3. So then my slope, whoops, slope equals 3 over 3 or 1. How's that? Pretty good. Okay, but here's the thing. I'm going to be mean. There's always going to be a third step, and it's called the verifying step. So when you found your two red points here, your two intercepts, you could have made a mistake, right? You very well could have done your math wrong somewhere and gotten one of these points wrong. But at first glance, this looks like a really good graph because we can connect the two dots to form a nice straight line. Okay, but any two dots will create a straight line. No matter where two dots are, if you join them, they'll always be joined by a straight line. So one of these dots could be wrong, but you wouldn't know it because it seems that they still form a nice straight line. So what we do for the verifying step is we find a third point. And if that third point falls along the same path or falls along that same line that those two original points make, then we know for sure we did it right. So to verify, you're going to choose any X value you want. Now, if you look at the graph I gave you here, I only went up to 6 and -6 for my X values. So don't choose X equals 10 because then you'd have to draw your graph out to X equals 10 and we don't have an X equals 10 on the graph I gave you. So I'm going to choose an X value that I can actually see here. Typically I choose X equals 1, but you can choose anything up to 6 or -6. So if I'm choosing X to be 1, I take my equation again, but I replace X with 1 this time, and I solve. So -2 times 1 is -2, plus 2y equals 6. Now to get y isolated, I'm going to add that 2 to both sides. So now I have -2 left, -2y left, all alone on the left-hand side, equaling 8. And then when I divide off that 2, I get y equals 4. So I just found that when X equals 1, Y equals 4. So what we do is we take that point and plot it and see if it lines up with the other two. So X equals 1, I go there and then I go up 4 and there we go. And yes, all three of these points fall in a nice straight line. So we know your graph is perfect. Okay, so I want you to always do this verifying step. All right. Okay, so now we can fly a little bit quicker with these next few because you know what we're up to. All right, so first I'm going to find my X-intercept, followed by my Y-intercept. So I'm just going to kind of make a little table here. So for my X-intercept, I replace Y with 0. With my Y-intercept, I replace X with 0. All right, so if I'm replacing Y with 0 here, I have 4X minus 3 times 0 equals 12. Anything times 0 goes away. So really I have 4x all alone on the left equaling 12. When I divide off that 4, I have x equaling 3. So I know that my graph will cross at x equals 3. Now I repeat for the y-intercept, but I make x 0. So I have 4 times 0 minus 3y equals 12. That just goes away. So I have negative 3y equals 12. Divide off that negative 3 so that y is isolated. 12 divided by negative 3 is negative 4. So I know my graph will cross the y-axis at where y equals negative 4. All right, to figure out my slope, I do my jumping. Actually, you know what? I should have mentioned this before. Don't do your slope yet. Do your verifying first. So because we don't want to find out the slope if one of these points is wrong, then our slope would be wrong. So that's my apologies. I should have said that for this first example too. Always do your verifying points first, and then once we know my points are correct, then we'll find the slope. So verifying, I'm going to choose x equals 2 this time because it doesn't matter. I take my equation for x, so it's now actually 4 times 2 minus 3y equals 12, and you solve. That's really 8 minus 3y equals 12. I need to get that 3y all by itself, so I'm going to take away 8 to both sides. So I have negative 3y equaling 4, 12 minus 8. I'm going to divide off that negative 3. Now, don't use the fraction. 4 divided by negative 3, we're going to use the decimal, okay? And 4 divided by negative 3 is 1.33333. So if you're going to calculate, you go 4 divided by 3, you'll get 1.33333 or just 3 repeated. You can use that symbol there, and it's negative. So I just found that when x is 2, y should be around negative 1.3. And that's okay that you have a decimal. We'll just estimate over here. So I'm going to zoom in a bit so we can get our estimation as precise as possible. So I chose x equaling 2, so I'm going to go here, but then I have to go down to where y is around negative 1.333. So it's not quite halfway. So I'd say that's about negative 1.333. And you can see that all three of our dots form a nice straight line. Isn't that nice? So now I know my points are right. Now I can find the slope. I go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's up 4. And then 1, 2, 3. That's to the right 3. Okay, so whoops. So I'm going to say that my slope is rise over run 4 over 3. And we're done. All right, a couple more like this. The next two examples are pretty much the exact same, you guys. So if you think you've got this cased, you can just stop the video. These two examples that follow aren't anything special. They're just more of the same. But if you think you're struggling with this a little bit still, just follow along for the next two. All right, so to find the x-intercept or where it crosses the x-axis at, I make y equal to 0. And I recopy the rest of the equation as is. Now this just becomes 0. 4 times 0 is 0. So on the left-hand side, all I have is 5x and that negative 20 still equaling 0. To solve for x, I'm going to add 20 to both sides. So now I have 5x equaling 20. I'm going to divide off the 5 and I get x equal to 4. So now I go over here and it crosses the x-axis at 4. All right, same process, but for my y-intercept now, I make x equal to 0. So I have 5 times 0 plus 4y minus 20 equals 0. That goes away. So all I have is 4y minus 20 equals 0. Same thing, I'm going to add that 20 to both sides so I can start isolating y. So I have 4y equaling 20. I divide off by 4 and I get that y equals 5. So now I know that it crosses my y-axis at 5. Over here, I'm going to do a verifying point. Okay, I'm going to choose, okay, this a little note here. We can see that the trend of this graph is like that. That was terrible. Holy smokes. The trend of this graph is like that, right? So if I chose my verifying point to be like x is negative 6, yes, it's on the graph, but for me to find what y is when x is negative 6, I'm going to have to be extrapolating. It's going to be way up here. Okay, so don't choose that value because you're going to have to extend your graph or extrapolate your graph. So that's why I always recommend using one of like these guys in here, 1 or 2 or -1, -2. Okay, so let's use -1 this time. Sure. All right, so I take my equation, I plug x in with -1. So I have 5 times -1 plus 4y minus 20 equals 0. This becomes -5 plus 4y minus 20 equals 0. I'm going to simplify these guys on the left-hand side. That actually makes -25 plus 4y equaling 0. I'm going to add 25 to both sides. I get 4y now equaling 25. I divide off 4 and you're going to get a decimal again, and that's okay. 25 divided by 4 is 6.25. So I just found that when I make x equal to -1, y should be around 6.25. So let's zoom in a little bit. All right, so I'm looking for where x is -1, but then I'm going to go up to 6.25. I'm going to erase this line right here because it's terrible. So when x is -1, y should be around 6.25. So here's 6. This is where 7 would be. 6.25, I'd say, is right about there. Okay, and if we look at that, boom, our 3 lines all fall, or sorry, our 3 points all fall in line. Of course, if you used a ruler on your sheet of paper, your line would be nicer. Okay, I'm not using a ruler here. Okay, and last but not least, let's roll. X-intercept, I'm going to make y 0. So if you look here, you have -x plus y. So it's really just plus 0 minus 1 equals 0. So now you have -x. That can just go away. And then I'm going to add the 1 to both sides. So I have -x equaling 1. Okay, you're not done. You don't want -x. You want x, right? So here you have to divide off a negative. So now that x becomes positive, and on the right-hand side, 1 divided by -1 is -1. So I know that my my x-intercept crosses the x-axis at -1. I do the same thing with the y-intercept, but now I make x equal to 0. So I have negative x, so I have -0 plus y minus 1 equals 0. Well, -0, that just goes away. I have y minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to add that 1 to both sides. There we go. So now I know that it crosses at y equals 1. Over here, I'm going to do my verifying point. I'm going to verify with, let's do x equals 3. Okay, I'm doing x equals 3 because I know that if the trend is like that, I'll very easily be able to see where that dot falls. I wouldn't have to extend my graph too much. All right, so when x equals 3, be careful here because it's negative. The equation says it's negative x, so it's actually going to be -3 plus y minus 1 equals 0. I'm going to simplify these guys. -3 take away 1 is actually -4 plus y equals 0. I'm going to add that 4 to both sides, and I get that y equals 4. So I just found my verifying point to be that when x equals 3, y should equal 4. So now we go back here. When x equals 3, that's there, and then y equals 4, that's that point. And then if we took a ruler and lined these guys up, we would see that they all fall nicely on line, so we know we did it right. The way you would know you did it wrong is say you verified your third point. So I'm just going to erase this. Say you verified your third point and you found that your third point was down here. Okay, well, if you try to join those, they're not making a straight line. So that would indicate to you that something went wrong somewhere, and you either calculated that point wrong, or you calculated this point wrong, or maybe this point wrong. So you'd have to go look through all of your points and figure out where you went wrong. Okay, but once we see that this third point falls nicely in line with the other two, it forms a straight line, we know we aced it. Okay, all right, so that is the final lesson. I didn't find slope. Sorry, I missed finding slope for these two guys. I'll just do that quickly. So I'll just hop between my points. So for C, you have options here. I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So because I went down 5, that's negative. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right. To the right is positive. So here my slope is rise over run. So the -5 is my rise over my run is 4. Okay. Here I went 1 up and 1 over. Up 1 to the right 1 is positive, positive. So here, whoops, my slope is I rose 1 and then I ran 1, both positive. So my slope is just +1. Okay. All right, now I'm done. So good luck with the assignment. Always message me with questions if you have any. And after this, you're on the final assignment. See you soon, I hope.